All right, settle in, Britain. Let's talk about something a bit uncomfortable, shall we? Subversion. Recently, there's been a growing concern that foreign meddling is creeping into British politics, and not in a charming, ooh, look at the quaint way they do elections kind of way. Parliament's been buzzing about it like a hornet's nest poked with a very pointy stick, and for good reason. The integrity of our elections, the very foundation of our democracy, is potentially at the stake. Enter the Defending Democracy Taskforce, a group with a name that sounds like it came straight out of a Bond film, and the Online Safety Act, a piece of legislation that, depending on who you ask, is either the digital equivalent of a sturdy umbrella in a rainstorm of disinformation or a soggy blanket thrown over the vibrant tapestry of free speech. Buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into this right royal mess. So, the Defending Democracy Taskforce sounds impressive, doesn't it? Like a crack team of MI6 agents ready to tackle election interference with a well-placed witticism and a Walther PPK. In reality, they're more like a group of very serious academics and policy wonks sifting through evidence and writing strongly worded reports. Their job is to investigate claims of foreign interference, whether it's through shady campaign donations, online disinformation campaigns, or attempts to manipulate the electoral process itself. Think of them as the Sherlock Holmes of electoral integrity, except instead of a deer stalker hat, they've got a magnifying glass pointed squarely at your Facebook feed. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's all well and good, Steve, but what have they actually found? And that's the million-pound question, isn't it? So far, they've been tight-lipped about specific cases, but the fact that they even exist suggests that there's something to see here. Something that goes beyond a few Russian bots tweeting about the Great British Bake Off. The task force has been reviewing evidence related to alleged subversion in recent elections, and let's just say they haven't exactly given a glowing bill of health. So, the question remains, are the democracy defenders a necessary safeguard against foreign meddling, or a bureaucratic behemoth with a penchant for secrecy? Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure, they've got their work cut out for them. Now, let's talk about the Online Safety Act, shall we? This hefty piece of legislation is the government's answer to the wild west of the internet, a digital sheriff riding in to clean up the town of disinformation and hate speech. On paper, it sounds pretty good. I mean, who doesn't love the idea of a safer, less toxic online experience? It's like promising everyone in the UK a lifetime supply of free Cadbury chocolate. What's not to like? Well, as with most things in life, the devil is in the details. The Act aims to tackle disinformation and foreign interference, particularly during elections, by putting more pressure on social media companies to remove harmful content. Think of it as a digital bouncer standing at the entrance of your favorite social media platform, checking IDs and refusing entry to anyone peddling conspiracy theories or trying to stir up trouble. Sounds great, right? Well, here's where things get a bit sticky. Critics argue that the Act gives the government too much power to police what we see and say online, potentially stifling free speech and dissent. They worry that it could turn the internet into a sanitized, government-approved echo chamber where any opinion deemed harmful is quickly scrubbed away. The government, of course, insists that the Online Safety Act is all about striking a balance between protecting people from harm and preserving free speech. But as with most things in the digital age, the line between protecting and policing can be blurry, and it remains to be seen how the Online Safety Act will play out in practice. Chapter 3. Government action, a triumphant huzzah or a right cock-up. Let's be clear, trying to protect a country from shadowy foreign interference isn't exactly a walk in the park. It's more like trying to herd cats blindfolded while riding a unicycle on a cobblestone street. Difficult, messy, and with a high probability of ending in disaster. But hey, at least the government's trying, right? One of the main arguments in favor of their efforts is that any attempt to safeguard our democracy is better than none at all. Think of it like putting a lock on your door. Sure, it might not stop a determined burglar, but it's better than leaving the door wide open with a sign that says, "Come on in, tea and biscuits are on the table." The Defending Democracy Taskforce, for all its secrecy, has at least shone a light on the issue of foreign interference, raising awareness and prompting discussions about how to protect our elections. And the Online Safety Act, while far from perfect, does attempt to address the very real problem of online disinformation, which can be weaponized to sow discord and manipulate public opinion. Ultimately, the success of the government's efforts will depend on their ability to find that sweet spot between security and freedom, between protecting our democracy and preserving our civil liberties. Chapter 4. Criticisms and Concerns. Is the cure worse than the disease? Now, for the other side of the coin, because let's be honest, there's always another side of the coin, even if it's just the Queen's face staring back at you again. Critics of the government's approach argue that it's a classic case of overkill, like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, or calling in the SAS to deal with a particularly aggressive squirrel. They argue that the threat of foreign interference, while real, is being blown out of proportion, used as an excuse to justify increased surveillance and censorship. Think of it like this. You wouldn't drain the entire Thames because you saw a suspicious-looking fish, would you? The Defending Democracy Taskforce has been criticised for its lack of transparency, with some accusing it of being a secretive body operating in the shadows, accountable to no one. And the Online Safety Act has been slammed for its potential to stifle free speech, with concerns that it could lead to the removal of legitimate content and the silencing of dissenting voices. Critics argue that focusing solely on foreign interference ignores the very real threat of domestic disinformation and manipulation, which can be just as damaging to our democracy. Ultimately, the question is whether the government's efforts to combat subversion are proportionate to the threat, and whether they strike the right balance between security and freedom. Chapter 5. Public Opinion, Stiff Upper Lip or Quietly Bricking It. So, how does the great British public feel about all this? Well, imagine you're at a pub quiz and the question is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you about foreign interference in British politics? You'd probably hear a lot of throat clearing, see a lot of awkward glances, and maybe even witness someone spontaneously combusting from the sheer awkwardness of it all. The truth is, public opinion on this issue is about as clear as a pint of warm ale. Some polls suggest that a significant portion of the population is concerned about foreign meddling, particularly online. They're worried about fake news, disinformation campaigns, and the potential for foreign actors to influence elections. Others are more skeptical, believing that the threat is overblown or that the government is using it as an excuse to grab more power. They argue that we've always had propaganda and foreign interference, and that we've managed to survive just fine without draconian laws and secretive task forces. Then there's the group of people who are just plain confused. The reality is that public opinion on this issue is complex and nuanced. Well, there you have it. The UK is grappling with the very real threat of subversion and foreign interference, and the solutions, as we've seen, are far from simple. We've got task forces operating in secrecy, legislation that could reshape our online lives, and a public that's caught somewhere between concern and confusion. It's a messy, complicated issue, and there's no easy answer. But what is clear is that we can't afford to be complacent. We need to stay informed, ask critical questions, and hold our elected officials accountable. We need to be wary of disinformation, think critically about what we see online, and engage in respectful debate with those who hold different views. After all, the best way to combat those who would seek to undermine our democracy is to prove that we're a nation that values open dialogue, critical thinking, and a healthy dose of skepticism. So go forth, Britain, and be the best, most informed and slightly paranoid version of yourselves. And for God's sake, if you see a suspicious-looking pigeon outside Parliament, report it to the authorities immediately.